All right, guys, so we're continuing in Genesis chapter 13 and Abram's life. He's headed back out of Egypt, back to the promised land. And I'll tell you, one of the things that encourages me about this is you see Abram start to get back on track in terms of following God. One of the first things he does, you see in verse 4, is that he worships God and he calls upon the name of the Lord. He's saying, God, okay, you're the one that I'm going to follow. You're the one that I'm going to serve. That's encouraging because that reminds me of my life. It reminds me of the sanctification process that God has me on. You know, even though Abram has done the awful things that he did in Egypt, that doesn't undo or change what God has promised for Abram. And Abram is beginning to follow God, a little bit more growth. We're starting to see a good direction for him. And then he has this conflict with his nephew Lot. They have so much wealth that it's not possible for them to be close to each other anymore, which is an important thing to contrast compared to what they experienced in the last episode, where conflict and challenge and problem came from famine. Now conflict and challenge and problem is coming from wealth. You know, this is the mo money, mo problems part of Abram's life. And it also is important to realize that, you know, especially in those ancient days, you know, we think of people in those times as being, you know, just barely being able to scrape things together, barely being able to survive. Well, no, these guys had so much wealth that they couldn't even be close to each other. And that also says that, man, they had tons of men, they had tons of resources. You know, all the reasons that you would stay close together for the strategic power of that from more hands allows you to produce more. Also, more hands gives you military strength to defend yourself from outside marauders. Well, they obviously feel comfortable enough and large enough and powerful enough that they can actually separate and not be near each other anymore. Now, so Abram says, okay, we need to have peace. We're family. We shouldn't be fighting with each other. So let's separate. If you want to go left, I'll go right. If you want to go right, I'll go left. So they look out over the land. And it says that Lot looked down. He looked down into the Jordan Valley and he saw that it was well watered. And it was like the garden of the Lord. It says that it was like the land of Egypt. And I think that is all telling us that Lot's eyes are on looking at the world in the way the world looks at things. He is seeing something that looks attractive and he wants it. You know, we see that as a theme throughout Scripture, is like seeing what's so good about Egypt. We need to stop following God and start going after Lot, and I think or going after Egypt. I think those are all little clues to tell us that Lot's heart is not in a good place. He is not headed in a good direction. We get a little Mosaic commentary there in verse 10. It says, this was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. We also see in verse 13 that the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. And this is all set up for things that are going to be happening later. And Scripture is very explicit about the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now let me show you Ezekiel. Let me get there here. Ezekiel 16:49 through 50. He says, behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters had pride, excess of food, and prosperous ease, but did not aid the poor and needy. You know, it's natural to think that if you live in a valley that's super lush, they have plenty, that they should have plenty to be able to share with people, but apparently they were not. They did not use the things that God had given them to help the poor and needy. In the next verse, it says, they were haughty and did an abomination before me, so I removed them when I saw it. So we're going to get to that in a couple of episodes down the road here. We'll get to Sodom and Gomorrah, but this whole section is setting this up. And we see a separation between Abram and Lot. And I think I referenced it earlier before, but is I think a question for me that I'm trying to figure out is, was Abram's act one of generosity in saying, hey, if you want the left, I'll go right. If you want the right, I'll go left. And he's wanting to just, you know, get peace with his nephew. And so in other words, is that a good thing that Abram did that? Or is it possible that Abram shouldn't be giving away land that God has promised to him? It's not his to give away in that sense. So I'm not sure how to take that. I tend to think that Abram's heart is in a good place. It's not necessarily a bad thing. This is all a part where we see Abram moving in a good direction, but we also see Lot heading in the wrong direction because his eyes are seeing something's good. Kind of like Eve. She saw the tree and it was good to eat. She saw with her eyes. I think that's the desires of his heart are not in the right place, and that's going to lead to temptation, lead to sin, and lead to other problems. We'll get to that. And then God extends his promises to Abram. God says in verse 14, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward, for all the land that you see I will give to you and to your offspring forever. So he's kind of already said those kind of things, but he's emphasizing it. He says, I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that no one can count the dust of the earth. Your offspring also can be counted. It's like there's going to be so many offspring from you, from your line, that it'll be near impossible to count all of them. And then so Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So he's continuing to worship the Lord. This is a good time for Abram, and he's moving in a good direction in terms of obedience and following and worshiping God. And so I think there's a number of things that we can glean and gather from this, but I think a lot of it also is really setting up for future things that are coming. I think probably the main thing that I could get from it is just really that heart of Lot. Lot's desire was oriented around what does the world say is good? What is good for me, just from a monetary, abundance and wealth standpoint. Now, on one hand, that makes sense. I think it's good to be good at business, and it's good to steward and grow what we have. But is that our desire? Is that where our eyes are oriented? Like, that's what I want? Or is what I want to glorify God and to give to him? And I think that's easy to do in terms of worship and glorifying and seeking the Lord first, when we're confident that he's the one that's going to provide for us in those other things. I don't have to seek first the kingdom of this world. I can seek first God and his righteousness, and then trust that all these things will be added unto me. So I'd be interested to hear what you guys think about some of those parts of the passage. Remember that you are loved. Guys, listen to Jesus. Follow him. Do what he says, guys, and let's walk together with him for his glory, for his kingdom. I love you all. We'll see you.